You have spent decades doing the right things, showing up to work, raising your family, giving to your church, living with integrity. And somewhere along the way, you assumed that faithfulness would take care of the financial part too. But now you're in your 50s or 60s and you're doing the math. And the math is making you uncomfortable. Maybe retirement looks closer than your savings account does. Maybe you've helped your kids, helped your parents, helped your church, and somewhere in all of that helping, you forgot to build. Maybe you've never said it out loud, but the question is sitting right there in the back of your mind. Did I miss something? Here's what might surprise you. You probably didn't miss something spiritually. You may have missed something practically. And the practical instruction, the specific step-by-step wisdom for building financial stability, has been sitting in the Bible the entire time. Not hidden, not coded, just overlooked. Because most of us were taught to read Scripture for comfort and inspiration. Almost nobody taught us to read it as the financial instruction manual. It also is. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Here is something that tends to stop people cold the first time they hear it. The Bible references money and possessions more than 2,300 times. That is more than it mentions faith, more than it mentions prayer. Jesus himself talked about money in nearly half of his parables. Not because God is obsessed with wealth, but because he knew that how we handle money reveals almost everything about how we handle trust, discipline, patience, and priorities. So the question is not whether God has something to say about your finances. The question is whether you have been listening to that part of the conversation. And here's where it gets specific for where you are right now. Because if you're between 45 and 65, you are in what financial planners call the most critical decade of your financial life. The decisions you make in this window don't just affect your retirement. They affect your children's inheritance. They affect your ability to give generously in your final chapter. They affect whether you spend your later years with peace or with pressure. This is not the time for vague inspiration. This is the time for wisdom with teeth. And remarkably, the Bible has exactly that. Let's start where Solomon started, because Solomon, the wealthiest man in the ancient world, left behind a financial framework that holds up in any economy, including this one. In Proverbs 21 verse 5, he wrote that the plans of the diligent lead to profit, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Read that slowly. He did not say the prayers of the faithful lead to profit. He did not say the tithes of the generous lead to profit. He said the plans. Diligence and planning are the mechanism. Faith is the foundation beneath them. And far too many Christians have been standing on the foundation without building anything on top of it. Think about someone you know, maybe it's you, who has given faithfully for 30 years, who has prayed over their finances, who has trusted God through every tight season, and yet who arrives at 60 with less saved than they need, no clear plan, and a quiet fear they don't often speak about. That person did not fail spiritually, but somewhere the practical instruction got disconnected from the faith, and that disconnection has consequences that compound, just like interest, only in the wrong direction.
So what did the Bible actually say to do? Because this is where most Christian financial content stops at tithing and moves on. But the scripture goes much further. Proverbs 13 verse 11 says that wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. That is a biblical argument for consistent, patient, long-term investing. It is an argument against get-rich-quick thinking. It is a description of how compound growth actually works, written 3,000 years before modern finance understood it mathematically. Little by little, month by month, faithfully and without drama. Now here's a question worth sitting with. If someone had handed you that verse at 35 and said, "This is God's instruction for how to build wealth, slowly, consistently, and without chasing shortcuts," would it have changed anything? Because for many people, the honest answer is yes. And that answer is not a reason for guilt. It is a reason to act now, with whatever time remains, because Proverbs doesn't have an age limit.
Luke 14 verse 28 records Jesus asking a question that sounds like financial planning. He says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost?" Jesus told his followers to calculate before they committed, to know their numbers, to understand what something would actually take before they started. That is not a principle about construction. That is a principle about life, about retirement, about how you handle debt, housing, income, and generosity simultaneously. You cannot steward what you haven't measured. And most people who struggle financially have never truly sat down and counted the cost of the life they are living. This is one of the places where the church has sometimes left people without the tools they needed. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but Sunday morning was designed for worship and community, not for a spreadsheet. And so generations of faithful people learned to pray over their money without learning to plan with it. The result is that some of the most spiritually committed people carry the most financial anxiety. And God never intended that. In fact, Proverbs 22 verse 7 says the borrower is slave to the lender. That was not a warning whispered quietly. That was God describing a condition he did not want for his people. Here is a pattern that appears repeatedly across Scripture that almost nobody talks about. The people God entrusted with great responsibility were, without exception, people who managed small things well first. Joseph managed a household before he managed a nation. David tended sheep before he led an army. The servant in Matthew 25 who received more was the one who had proven faithful with what he already had. There's a through line in the Bible from beginning to end. God watches how you handle what you already have before he expands your capacity. That means your financial faithfulness right now. Even if right now means making a budget for the first time at 58 is not too late. It is actually exactly on time. So what does this look like practically for someone in your stage of life? Because inspiration without instruction is just a feeling. Let's make this concrete. The first principle the Bible consistently teaches is that you must know what you have. Proverbs 27 verse 23 says, "Know well the condition of your flocks, and give attention to your herds." In the ancient world, flocks were wealth. Today, your flocks are your savings account, your 401k, your debt load, your monthly cash flow. You cannot manage what you have not looked at honestly. The first act of biblical financial stewardship is not giving, is seeing clearly. The second principle is to eliminate what enslaves you. Debt, in Scripture, is consistently treated as a burden that restricts freedom and limits generosity. Romans 13 verse 8 says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other." The goal is not to be sophisticated about debt management. The goal is to be free from it. If you're carrying consumer debt into your 60s, credit cards, car payments, personal loans, that is not just a financial issue. It is a stewardship issue. Because every dollar going to interest is a dollar that cannot go toward your future, your family, or your giving. The third principle, and perhaps the most misunderstood one, is this: generosity is not the alternative to financial wisdom. It is the companion to it. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 6 says, Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. But notice the context. Paul was not telling poor people to give away what they couldn't afford. He was describing a posture of the heart, a person whose hands are open rather than clenched. Generous people tend to make better financial decisions because generosity requires you to think beyond yourself. It requires planning. It requires knowing what you have so you can give from it freely. The Bible has more to say about your financial life than almost any book ever written. Not because God is a financial advisor in the modern sense, but because he created human nature, and he understood that what people do with money reveals what they actually trust. He wanted you to trust him, and he gave you a practical framework for doing that, not just spiritually, but practically, daily, in the decisions that compound over decades into either freedom or pressure. You don't need more money to start. You need more wisdom applied to what you already have. And that wisdom, every page of it, is sitting in the book you may have read 100 times without ever reading it, as the financial manual it also is. Start there. Start today. Because the best financial decision you will ever make is the one you stop delaying. If this video helped you see something differently today, share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below telling us the one biblical principle about money that hit you hardest. We read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the right moment to do that, because we are just getting started with what the Bible has to say about building a life of genuine financial peace.